So today I'm going to talk about how to attach an applied border, so a knitted on border if you want, or an applied edging. And I'm working on the Mystery Knit Along the Journey to Purl Island. So this is chapter 2, and you'll see there I've cast on my additional stitches at the end of my row. I've used a cabled cast on just to keep it nice and firm. And the first thing I'm going to do is knit across these stitches so that I've got my first short row. And when I get to the end of these stitches, I'm going to start the process of attaching as I go. So basically what happens when you knit an applied edging like this is that you're knitting kind of perpendicular to your work. So we've worked 5 rows of garter stitch along the edge of our chapter 1 knitting. And now we're going to start knitting back. We're switching directions and we're going to start knitting back. Actually, the knitting is going to follow the same direction as chapter 1 now. So we're switching the direction and knitting perpendicular to those 5 garter stitch rows that we've worked. And I'm just going to get to the end of this row here. I'm knitting the first option, just a simple ladder rib. So I've cast on 29 extra stitches, and you can see that I've used a different color for my garter stitch rows. This is actually my chapter 3 color, but just to add a little visual interest, I've done those garter rows in my chapter 3 color. So here I am at the end of the row, struggling a little bit with that stitch, but what I've done is I've slipped the last stitch of my new cast on stitches and then slipped the first stitch of my garter row, and then I'm just going to SSK those together. So slip them, and knit them together through the back loop. And that's my first short row. And I'm going to turn it around. Now this is a stitch that maybe there's some people who aren't too familiar with. I'm slipping a stitch from those garter stitch rows. Oh, I am, yep. And what I'm going to do is go behind those first 2 stitches now, come through the back loop there. I'll just show you that again. So there's right through the back loop and purl them together. So this is a purl 2 together through the back loop. And I'm just going to interrupt myself and slow that down and show you again. So I've slipped that stitch, the garter stitch, and I'm taking those 2 stitches through the back loop to purl. And here's that motion one more time. Taking both those back loops and then purling them together. And the reason that we're doing it that way, whoops, just got caught there. The reason that we're doing it that way is because purl 2 together through the back loop mirrors the SSK that we just did exactly, so that the last stitch on your applied border is going to hug over top of your garter stitch rows really nicely. You won't have any wobbliness or funny looking. It's all just going to be a nice uniform looking stitch all the way along there, regardless of what side you're on. There are a lot of other ways to achieve this. This is just the one that I prefer and that I wrote specifically for this pattern because I like the way that it looked. So here I am set up to do my next right side row, and I'm just going to speed it up so that I can show you that SSK nice and up close. There we go, I'm all set up, and here we go. Here's the slip, nice and close here, and I've slowed it down. Slip, and knitting right through that back loop so that it's hugging over. So that's my second right side row done there. And when I flip it around on this wrong side row, you'll notice I'm not going to attach it to the border at all. And this is because we're going back to that 3 out of every 4 ratio. So we're making 4 rows, we're knitting 4 rows for every 3 stitches on that of those garter stitch edge. So we're skipping attaching a row every 4th row. So in this pattern, you attach every single right side row, but only every other wrong side row. So I'm skipping this wrong side row. And when I get back to the next right side row, which I'm going to start knitting in my pattern, in my stitch pattern, I will start attaching again. So here is my progress thus far. I've had a couple of hours to work on some rows, on my short rows, because I wanted to show you what I mean by, first of all, that it's going to change directions, that we're going to be working perpendicular to those garter stitch rows there. This is the stitch pattern 1. You can see that this knitting is now following the same direction as our first chapter 1. I also want to show you what I was talking about, that 3 to 4 ratio again. If you pull out these stitches, you can see that they're attached, and those stitches are attached in groups of 3. And there's a little space in between, which you won't see normally, but just because I'm stretching it out here, you can see that they're attached in groups of 3. And this is handy for keeping track of where you are in the attaching. It's not super critical that you get it right every single time. It will absorb some little flubs in there, so don't stress about it too much, but just so we're giving the rows a little bit extra, or rather the stitches a little bit extra breathing space, and making 4 rows for every 3 of those stitches.